evening, everyone, to tonight's Movie Matters talk. On this series, News Hounds on Screen, Journalism at Stake. And tonight, I'm going to be talking about Absence of Malice. Directed by Sydney Pollack, the film was released in 1981. So the screenwriter of the play, actually the co-screenwriter, was a man named Kurt Luedecke. He was a former executive editor of the Detroit Free Press newspaper. And he was the screenwriter for 3 films directed by Sydney Pollack. So I just want to do a little synopsis of these particular 3 films. Of course, one is Absence of Malice, 1981, the one under discussion tonight. A drama that is focused on 2 investigations in modern-day Miami. A federal investigation into an unsolved case, the murder of a longshoreman union boss, and an investigation by a reporter, Megan Carter. Sally Field plays the role. The prime suspect for both investigations is Michael Gallagher, Paul Newman, who is a rum importer. He's the son of a dead bootlegger, and he has a cordial relationship with his uncle, a crime boss. So we can have this ambivalence about the character Michael Gallagher. The film's narrative focuses on the issue of crossing ethical boundaries. A federal agent, named Elliot Rosen, he leaks a file on his desk. He's an obsessive about surveillance, and he's the character who's constantly playing with rubber bands. He's just antsy character. He's a hustler. He has that nervous habit. The reporter, Megan Carter, her journalistic assumption is triggered by the file on Gallagher that Rosen leaves on his desk. So we now have the narrative complication of a romance with the prime suspect between the journalist and Michael Gallagher. All right, so let's just put Absence of Malice on the table for a moment. Out of Africa, 3 years later, 1985, also directed by Pollack. It's based on a memoir of adventure writer Isaac Dinesen, played by Meryl Streep. The film is set in picturesque Africa during the white settler period post-World War I. So we have a writer's romance with a restless white hunter, played by Robert Redford. So it's an epic film, and the romanticism of it is also epic. Note Roger Ebert, in talking about the film, talked about the high voltage stars, Streep and Redford, the sweeping emotions of the characters, and Redford's on-screen mystique. And Redford and Streep had both made some significant films before this. So let's now just have a little synopsis of the third film that Luedecke wrote for Sydney Pollack, director. Random Hearts, 1999, a romantic drama set in Washington. A police sergeant, Harrison Ford, investigates a crooked detective killed in a plane crash. The narrative is complicated by an affair with a dead man's wife, a U.S. Congresswoman, played by Kristen Scott Thomas. So we have these compromised characters tripping between high and low moral ground. And I want to say that in all 3 films, we have very charismatic male lead actors. Paul Newman, Robert Redford, and Harrison Ford. And women characters who fall for them, played by women screen stars of note. The journalist R.O. Scott in the New York Times noted Pollack's particular skill as a director. And I quote, "He is able to harness the charisma of movie stars to great emotional and dramatic effect." Pollack himself, quoted in the Washington Post in 2005, said, "I don't have a style." He's not a stylist. "I've never thought of myself as a stylist," he says, in which every shot has a great idea. But I do want to point out that Absence of Malice was shot in Panavision and deluxe color. So that there's a visual richness to it, that's the deluxe color, and the scope of the big screen. This was made in pre-HBO movie network period. So early in the 1980s, movie-going still meant not turning on your television set necessarily, but going to theaters. And there was an appetite for the star power represented in the film. So the opening pre-credit sequence is quite an extraordinary scene with an upbeat music track about the newspaper's processes, writing the story, the layout, the headline, the typesetting, the printing, and ultimately the destination of the city street-sized newsstand. There's an immediate cut edit to the reporter, Megan Carter, passing by the newsstand on her way to work. So we have these linked processes of what it is to turn out a daily newspaper. You need the personnel, and you need the processes, the technical processes. So we have also the links between reporters and editors, and we have a lawyer in the world of the film to explain libel, or that concept of absence of malice. So this is the ethical question, the concept in the film's thematic title. The newspaper's attorney explains the concept to Megan. Quote, "I'm telling you, madam, that as a matter of law, the truth of your story is irrelevant. We have no knowledge that your story is false. Therefore, we're absent of malice. We've been both reasonable and prudent. Therefore, we're not negligent. We may say whatever we'd like to say about Mr. Gallagher, and he is powerless to do us harm. Democracy is served." End of story. Not really. Because the press in the state and the state as institutions are damaged in the world of the film, and there's a high human cost. All right, so now we know the concept. Let's go on to how the film establishes two pursuits. The government agents, a male group, that is FBI surveillance, grainy black and white footage of a funeral, the close-up in the footage of Michael Gallagher, a shadowy figure, shielded by sunglasses, and the press, reporter Megan Carter eavesdropping in on this funeral. So the film is set in Dade County, Miami. It's set in a film's fictional newspaper called, or around a fictional newspaper called the Miami Standard. But it was actually shot in the Miami Herald newsroom, which lends an authenticity to the world of the film. And the role of Megan's editor, her boss, McAdam. He coaches Megan, sets her up for success, and he tinkers with her story. And the stories are distilled, of course, into catchy headlines with Megan's byline, her name is on the story. And so there is an indictment of the press and the complicit indictment in the relation to the personnel. Well, look at this first image. Here's Megan on the job, actress Sally Field. Look at her desk. It's awash in clutter. She has her tote bag beside her. She's got a telephone in one hand and a cigarette in the other. She has pencils in a jar. And look at her colleagues behind her. doing the same thing on the telephone, chasing a story. I can't tell you how many times in my academic life I would get calls from reporters at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They had byline deadline for 5 o'clock stories, and they wanted me to comment on something that was going on in the media. And I typically learned that no, if you're really interested, come back, check in with me tomorrow, and in a phone call, and I'll give you a considered view on whatever you're asking. But I don't do rush commentary. All right, so later in the film, the editor will abandon Megan when she oversteps. And there's that suspect source of the FBI file, which proves to be, of course, a setup. And there's the closeness of her to the subject, Michael Gallagher, and the potential of legal repercussions. The narrative is complicated by Gallagher's own setup, or being set up by the FBI and by Megan. On the one hand, Gallagher is a good guy. He's got a secret alibi. He's a friend to Teresa. On the other hand, he's a romantic figure, and he has a gangster uncle. He's both shady and strategic when he sets up Megan. Perhaps he's not following in his father's legacy. Perhaps he's truly a legit rum importer and not a bootlegger. But over dinner, Megan has her suspicions, and she tells Michael, "You're hustling me." So at issue is investigative reporting, and as British media theorist Hugo de Burgh said, investigative reporting depends on material gathered or generated through the reporter's own initiative. Now think of Megan's meeting in the park with Teresa, Gallagher's longtime friend. She pulls out her pad and pen as soon as Teresa reveals the alibi of Gallagher having taken her to have an abortion. It's 1981, she says. People will understand. Teresa, please don't write this, and walks away. And of course, there's that touching scene where she's crouching, waiting for the newspapers to be delivered in the morning with the story that Megan has written. And she jumps over the lawns in her neighborhood, gathering up the newspapers with the story that fears her, and of course she kills herself. Megan's editor confesses that he's never sure he's right, but he pushes her to write the story. And we get a shot of the presses technically rolling out the daily newspaper. He assures stunned Megan regarding Teresa's suicide, "It was not your fault." Of course, Gallagher's retaliation is physically brutal and verbal at the dock warehouse. You'll remember how he attacks her, tears her blouse, tries to choke her. He's just so distressed and angry that she has revealed that he had taken Teresa to that abortion so long ago. It was his alibi, but it destroyed her. And so look at this shot of Gallagher, played by Paul Newman here. He's pointing, he's yelling at her after he's attacked her. He's pointing to the story in the newspaper, and he's got a stack of newspapers on a small table behind him. He accuses her. "You couldn't stop scribbling? Didn't you see her? Didn't you like her?" So he accuses her of sort of breaching the ethics of being a decent human being. A writer named Tom Jones, a journalist actually, in 2019 identified Absence of Malice as being among the top 25 films about journalism. And I'm quoting him. "Absence of malice is the legal definition for a defense against a libel lawsuit. Paul Newman is on top of his game. Wilford Brimley takes over one of the climactic scenes. Sally Field is perfect as the eager young reporter, and Melinda Dillon is heartbreaking in a scene when she picks up newspapers off the lawns in her neighborhood to keep readers from finding a story that had her having an abortion. In Pollack's film, Pollack's film, I should say, is used in journalism classes to illustrate the conflict between disclosing damaging personal information and the public's right to know. So the casting of attractive Hollywood stars and character actors pulls us as viewers into the drama, and it pulls us into questioning motives of some of the characters. We become a bit like journalists, inquisitive. Oscar nominations for Newman for Best Actor, Leading Role for this film. Melinda Dillon won Best Actress, Supporting Actress. And the film got an Oscar for the Best Writing directly for the screen. Now let's put this in the context again of a media theorist. Again, I'm quoting Hugo de Bird. He refers to the moral impetus that should drive investigative journalism. That is, the imperative or the obligation to tell the truth. Of course, that truth becomes tangled when there is something that can't be revealed or a source that can't be revealed. He writes that investigative journalists are policing the boundaries between order and deviance. He goes on to say that the image of the investigative journalist as intrepidly stepping outside the established order and accusing society is a romantic one. He or she rarely does that. In other words, journalists are all too human. In the film, reporters are quite human. They socialize in bars over dinner. This is what they do. They have social scenarios including hookups, romances, dating, getting the scoop, eavesdropping. It's apparent that Megan and Agent Waddell were once a couple, and they're still friends. Waddell is the one who gives Megan the thick federal investigative file. So in the world of the film, who actually killed the dead Diego is something of a cold case. But it's still affecting disgruntled union dock workers, Gallagher's men, blacks, Hispanics, without a voice, and an angry boss in Gallagher who's got a personal vendetta now. Jim Willis, who has written on journalists and journalism and ethics particularly, says, although the abstract aspects of subjectivity and objectivity are not discussed frequently in newsrooms, ethics are the focus of much discussion among many journalists because reporters value the concepts of balance and fairness. And he refers to the specific ethical code of professional integrity being the cornerstone of a journalist's credibility. Now, I want to now move to the key scene in the film of what I call the moment of reckoning. And it's the third image you're going to see on your screen now. Here we see the amazing character Wilford Brimley, who comes into the film, into the narrative at this point, to sort things out before anything would possibly go to trial. He is the Assistant Attorney General. Now, Wilford Brimley is an extraordinary character actor. I just saw him in a rerun the other night again on Seinfeld, where he plays the Postmaster General of the United States, who comes to face with a character in the film who is determined that he does not want any mail, especially those pottery brown catalogs that keep coming. But that's an aside. All right. As Wilford Brimley plays the Assistant Attorney General in the film, he's folksy, he's wise, he's pointed. It's a trial without a trial. Every player is exposed, brought to heel. As he says, it's the damnedest story you ever read, and somebody's ass is in my suitcase. In fact, at the end of the scene, he gives Agent Elliot, the one who leaked the file, a 30-day notice. He lectures Megan regarding the leaking of stories for no reason. It ain't right, he says. True to the ethical code among journalists about not revealing sources, she protects her once boyfriend, FBI agent Waddell, who gave her that fat file. Gallagher in the scene admits, he's kind of aloof in the scene. He admits to a clever scheme where he entrapped a higher up in the FBI, a man named Quinn, who has political ambitions. So how does Gallagher entrap him? By sending donation checks to him for several $1,000s made out to some kind of slogan-bearing effort called Building a Better Miami. Now, the only person not included in this scene rather surprises me, and that would be the editor of the newspaper, who seems to have gotten off scot-free, as the saying goes. Personal damage is apparent in the scene that follows, and that is Megan and Michael estranged at the elevator. There's a distance between them. There's a breach of trust. Laura Kirshner, who wrote a discussion on absence of malice in the Columbia Journalism Review in 2011, titled When Bad Journalism Fails, and I'm quoting her. Megan Carter is a tough lady, but she seems to have lost her sense of humanity. She holds the innate conviction that journalism is important without understanding how incredibly harmful it can be if done badly. The continuously distraught Teresa Peroni is collateral damage. And she, that is, Laura Kirshner, in writing this, says, accuses Carter of being a very bad listener. She pulls out her notebook and starts scribbling to Peroni's horror. A man named, who's a retired professor in public management from the University of Toronto, named Sanford Bournes, wrote an article on absence of malice called Learning from Mistakes, and I quote him. He says, thinking that the post-Watergate lionizing of heroic investigative journalists had gone too far, screenwriter Kurt Ludekind, remember him, a former newspaper reporter and executive editor of the Detroit Free Press, left journalism to write a screenplay about incompetent tradecraft. And of course, that film is Absence of Malice. A work of fiction, as Barnes notes, appears to have been structured like a teaching case in journalism school, with the objective of presenting errors in tradecraft. The narrative arc of the film is a counter-fable, he says, to a heroic tale. Within its small universe, Absence of Malice speaks in a cautionary way to the power of investigative journalism. I want to quote Roger Ebert, Chicago Sun-Times, 1981, when the film came out. He says, I not only like this movie despite its factual and ethical problems. Absence of Malice is really about a woman's spunk and a common man's sneaky revenge. Sally Field's character is created through a quietly original performance that is not Norma Ray, with a pencil behind her ear. She is an earnest, nervous, likable young woman who makes mistakes when she listens too closely to her heart, her ambition, or her editor. And so The last image you're going to see in this talk takes place at the dock, and here it is, and it's something of a reconciliation between Michael Gallagher on the boat. He's heading away. He's packed up his belongings, sold his home. He offers her a beer. She's on the dock, and notice how casual her dress is now. Can they bridge the chasm that's represented between the dock and the boat and what's happened? Field's scope as an actress was well established a few years before this film in 1979 in Norma Rae. She won an Oscar, a Golden Globe, and a Cannes Film Festival award, Best Actress for Norman Rae. So she's no slight match here with Newman playing the role of Megan Carter. So let's just very quickly look at this final scene at Dockside. There's a tentative dialogue between Megan and Michael. She says, "We were pretty famous for a week." Michael says he didn't read the story, that is the retraction. Megan says, "What I do for a living isn't nothing, just that I do it badly." I get the feeling that I want to say, could I write? Now that's a very interesting question, because is she asking him, do you think I'm a good writer? Or could I write to you? Could we write? He doesn't really answer that question, but Michael says, maybe see you one of these days. She, I'd like that. He, be well. So the film ends with a long shot of the harbor, and we see the boat named Rum Runner appearing very small in this scope, panoramic shot, passing these huge yachts. So the Miami port is very scenic, but it's filled with hidden stories to tell, and Gallagher's is one of them, and so is Megan's. This is a moneyed, safe harbor of pleasure and secrets. And I thought I just want to conclude on something noteworthy, I think, from PEN America website in 2004. That was the 12th anniversary of the PEN, Newman's Own, remember, how his salad dressings and spaghetti sauces became not only very popular, but financially successful. And so he supported all kinds of institutions and made all sort of donations to support good works, good people, and good industries, ethical industries. So on this 12th anniversary of the PEN, Newman's Own First Amendment Award, which was established by Paul Newman and author A.D. Hotchner to honor a U.S. resident who had fought courageously despite adversity to safeguard the First Amendment right to freedom of expression as it applies to the written word. Of course, it's very clear that Paul Newman, the actor, is very invested in the First Amendment, the right to free expression, and to writers. And in fact, I'm going to end on this point, or this small note. Newman wrote an article for The Nation, which is a liberal American magazine, and he structures it as a dialogue on American military power. And he uses the trope of his young grandson playing chess with a general. And this young grandson confronts the general. And of course, what the child is doing in the world of the short story, or the short article by Newman, is confronting the institution of America's military power. So that's the conclusion of Movie Matters for tonight on the film Absence of Malice, and I look forward to seeing you next time.